22 seconds. That's all it took for Jasmine Crockett to leave the President of the United States trembling in front of the nation. Inside a packed congressional hearing, she ripped open Trump's secret $5.5 billion Nvidia deal and mocked his outrageous $10 billion lawsuit like it was nothing more than a tantrum. Gasps erupted, cameras zoomed in, and for the first time, America watched its sitting president silenced, not by his enemies, but by the truth. If Jasmine can crush the most powerful man in the world in less than half a minute, what else is she about to reveal that could change everything we thought we knew? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The gavel slammed once, and the room stopped breathing. Every camera light turned white hot, burning onto the face of the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, sitting at the witness table, jaw clenched, ready to fight. He wasn't here to defend policy, he was here to defend his pride, his fortune, and a lawsuit so staggering it had already split America in two. $10 billion against the Wall Street Journal. But across from him sat the one person who refused to flinch, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her eyes locked on him like a blade honed for war. The air inside the chamber felt heavier than stone. Millions of Americans were glued to their screens, watching history unfold in real time. Outside, protesters screamed through megaphones, half chanting "Justice for America," and the other half roaring "Trump forever." But inside, silence ruled. Everyone knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about a lawsuit, it was about whether the president had sold out America's security in exchange for saving his friend's company from a $5.5 billion collapse, and whether his ego was now so inflated he'd drag the Constitution through the mud just to protect it. Trump leaned into the microphone, lips curling into that familiar smirk. He looked ready to unleash the show he always loved, mocking, taunting, spinning himself into the victim. But Jasmine didn't blink. She sat forward, her body still, her voice steady, carrying the weight of millions who had grown tired of corruption dressed as patriotism. Her presence alone turned the hearing from routine theater into a reckoning. She wasn't there to ask questions. She was there to strike. "Mr. President," Jasmine began, her tone cutting through the silence like glass shattering, "you're demanding $10 billion because a newspaper told the truth. $10 billion for your ego. Yet when Nvidia begged you to rescue them after a $5.5 billion loss, you didn't hesitate to bend national security for your friend's fortune. Tell me who's really cashing in here, America or Donald Trump?" Gasps tore through the chamber. Senators shifted uncomfortably. The sound of pens clattering against would echo like gunfire. For the first time that night, Trump hesitated. His jaw tightened, his hands gripped the table, but his eyes darted. For a man who thrived on spectacle, this moment wasn't playing to his script. The camera zoomed closer, catching every flicker on his face. At home, families leaned forward, some whispering, some shouting at their TVs. On Twitter, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Trump humiliated. Hashtag Jasmine strikes. Trump forced out a laugh, hollow and sharp. "Fake news," he spat, voice rising, "another Democrat witch hunt. She's nothing but a puppet." But Jasmine didn't waver. She leaned in closer, eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a deadly calm that pierced deeper than any shout. "Deader a puppet of the people than a president who puppets this nation's security for personal gain." The chamber shook with murmurs, reporters scribbling furiously. Trump froze again, that smirk collapsing into something raw, something cornered. And as millions of Americans held their breath, one question thundered louder than the gavel, louder than the protests, louder than Trump himself. When power and ego collide under the nation's gaze, who will survive the storm? The heavy oak doors burst open, and the chamber erupted in a flash of sound and fury. Secret Service fanned out like black shadows, but it was Donald J. Trump who commanded the room, striding in as though the hearing itself was his stage. His chin was raised, his face flushed, his hand waving to the crowd of loyalists packed in the gallery who cheered with thunderous applause. The President of the United States wasn't here to answer questions, he was here to perform. He lifted his fist in the air, basking in the spectacle. "They want to silence me," he shouted before even taking his seat. "But I will never be silenced. $10 billion is the price of truth, my truth." His voice bounced off the chamber walls, swelling with the bravado of a man who thrived in chaos. Supporters roared, red hats bobbing, some rising to their feet as if it were a campaign rally. But beneath the noise, A ripple of unease slithered through the room. On the Republican benches, murmurs spread like a virus. Mulinar's Wall Street Journal op-ed had landed like a dagger in the party's chest. For the first time, a sitting GOP congressman had accused their president of betraying America's security for personal gain. Whispers hissed from ear to ear. Is he right? Can we defend this? Trump, oblivious or pretending not to notice, smirked as he dropped into his chair, gripping the microphone as though it were a weapon. He glanced across the table at Jasmine Crockett. She didn't clap, didn't blink, didn't move. Her silence was heavier than applause. Where Trump carried nose, she carried weight. The tension between them was visible. A taut rope stretched across the chamber, daring either one to pull first. He leaned toward her, lowering his voice just enough for the microphone to catch. You think you're ready for me? You're nothing but a headline chaser. This is my country. You're just a guest. His words dripped with venom, a private threat made public by the cameras that capture every syllable. Jasmine tilted her head, her eyes unblinking, lips pressed into the faintest of smiles. She said nothing, but the silence wasn't weakness. It was the silence before lightning strikes. The chair's gavel slammed, calling for order. But the air was already electric, crackling with anticipation. Trump straightened, puffing his chest, playing the role he loved best, the victim-turned-warrior, the martyr besieged by fake news and traitors. His supporters cheered again, drowning out the unease festering among his own ranks. Cameras zoomed tight, splitting the frame. Trump's face flushed with arrogance and defiance, Jasmine's calm mask of steel. Two forces locked in a collision course that neither could escape. And as the chamber held its breath, the question seared into every mind watching across America was no longer if they would clash, but when and whether Jasmine Crockett had the strength to withstand the wrath of a president who dared to see the truth itself behind the chamber doors. The noise of Trump's entrance still echo like distant thunder, but Jasmine Crockett stood in the dim hallway, her hand resting on a simple folder filled with documents that could ignite a political firestorm. The air smelled faintly of old wood and television cables, the hum of 1,000 machines feeding America's living rooms with every second of this spectacle. She closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the chants, the gavel, the cameras, and let herself return to the place that had first given her a voice, her community. The neighborhoods in Dallas, where mothers worked to jobs, where kids studied by the glow of streetlights, where promises of equality still felt like unfinished business. Jasmine breathed slowly, not to calm herself, but to sharpen her edge. Trump thrived on rage and spectacle. He swallowed rooms whole with arrogance. But she knew her weapon was different. It wasn't volume, or ego, or money. It was precision. She remembered the words of her mentor who had told her once, when liars scream, truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to stand. Tonight, she was standing not just for herself, but for millions who had no microphone, no stage, no seat in this chamber, people whose lives would be shaped by the deals made in these marble halls. She ran her fingers over the folder, feeling the weight of the papers inside. Mulinar's op-ed, the NVIDIA stock disclosures, the contract details Trump wanted hidden. These weren't just documents, they were evidence, and evidence was fire. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from anticipation. She knew walking into that room was walking into a blaze set by the most powerful man in the world, but she had already made peace with it. Tonight, she whispered to herself, truth will walk into the fire and it will not burn. The knock on the door came, sharp and impatient. An aide poked her head in. Congresswoman, they're waiting. Jasmine opened her eyes, steel replacing softness. She adjusted her jacket, straightened her shoulders, and stepped forward. The hallway stretched like a tunnel toward the blinding light of the chamber, each step echoing with a clarity that reminded her. This was no longer about party lines, lawsuits, or headlines. This was about whether the most powerful office in the world could be held accountable by one woman with the courage to call out a lie. As she reached for the handle, the muffled sound of Trump's voice bled through the door, dripping with mockery and self-praise. It didn't shake her. If anything, it steadied her grip. She wasn't entering a hearing, she was entering an arena. And as the cameras turned, the nation held its breath, waiting to see if one voice could pierce the armor of billions. The door swung open. Light exploded across her face, and Jasmine stepped into the blaze with the calm of a warrior. But as America leaned forward, the question wasn't whether she would strike, it was whether courage could possibly be enough when lies were backed by billions. Trump gripped the microphone, as though it were a scepter, his voice booming with the practiced cadence of a showman who believed every stage belonged to him. "The Wall Street Journal," he sneered, pausing for effect. "Printed filth, absolute lies, disgusting, fake garbage. And that's why they'll pay me $10 billion. He stabbed the air with his finger on each word, his grin widening as if he had already cashed the check. The gallery erupted with cheers from loyalists, red caps bobbing like flames, a sea of tension. He leaned back, soaking in the nose, reveling in the image of himself as the wrong king standing above the ruins of so-called fake news. "They thought they could embarrass me with some filthy little story," he barked, his face flushing red. "But I'll embarrass them. I'll bankrupt them. Nobody humiliates me and gets away with it." His hand slammed the desk, echoing like a gunshot. Cameras flashed, capturing the smug defiance, the arrogance of a man who believed the law bent to his will, and then silence. Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, her voice low but sharp, slicing through the chamber like a blade. $10 billion, she said, her tone icy with precision, "for your pride. $10 billion to soothe your ego. Yet when Nvidia begged you to save them from a $5.5 billion collapse, you didn't hesitate to sell out America's security in exchange for your friend's fortune." Her eyes locked on him, unflinching. "Tell me, Mr. President, how much is this country worth to you when your loyalty is measured in billions?" The room gasped, even the shuffle of papers ceased. Trump's smirk faltered, his face twitching in a flash of disbelief, as if someone had reached across the table and struck him. The crowd's cheers evaporated into murmurs, their confidence punctured by Jasmine's words. Senators shifted in their seats, some exchanging glances, others scribbling furiously in notepads. The truth had landed like a hammer, and the weight of it rattled the chamber. Trump tried to laugh it off, but it was a hollow sound, brittle against the rising tide of tension. "More lies," he snapped, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "She's twisting the facts. This is what Democrats do. They smear, they distort, they hate America." But his eyes betrayed him, darting toward the cameras as though searching for escape routes. The swagger that had carried him through countless scandals suddenly seemed thinner, brittle, exposed under the glare of unrelenting lights. Jasmine didn't let go. She leaned forward, her voice firm, calm, and merciless. "Fake news didn't write your stock disclosures. Fake news didn't make you cut a deal that jeopardized our national security. You did that. You wrote your own indictment, Mr. President, and no lawsuit can erase it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Reporters' pens froze midair. Trump's lips pressed into a tight line, his jaw grinding with fury, but no words came. For the first time in the night, he looked cornered not by the press, not by the opposition, but by his own arrogance mirrored back at him. And as millions of Americans leaned closer to their screens, the question wasn't whether Jasmine had drawn blood. It was how long Trump could keep hiding when the only enemy that could truly destroy him was standing right there in plain sight, his own ego. The chamber had barely recovered from Jasmine's strike when she reached into her folder. The sound of paper sliding against wood was faint, but in that silence it might as well have been a gun cocking. Every eye followed her hands as she unfolded a printed page and raised it just high enough for the cameras to catch. "Mr. President," Jasmine said evenly, her voice sharpening with each syllable, "you like to call me a liar. You like to call the press fake. But what will you call this?" She held up the op-ed with the Wall Street Journal's banner across the top, its headline blazing under the lights. "Trump has it wrong on Nvidia," by Representative John Molinar, Republican, Michigan. The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Senators froze. A sharp, intake of breath rippled through the gallery. Jasmine began to read, her cadence deliberate, slicing through the chamber's tension. "Allowing U.S. companies to sell controlled technology to China, while taxing their sales as a condition, sets a dangerous precedent," she recited, her voice unwavering. "These technologies are controlled because they can harm national security. If they fall into the wrong hands." She lowered the page slightly, her gaze never leaving Trump. "This isn't a Democrat. This isn't the media. This is one of your own." Gasps echoed across the chamber. Some Republicans exchanged glances, others shifted uneasily in their seats, while the Democrats sat in stunned silence, realizing Jasmine had just torn open a fracture in the very foundation of Trump's party. Trump's face darkened, his jaw pulsing as though it might shatter. He slammed his fist onto the desk, the microphone rattling. "Traitor!" he roared, spit flying as the word ricocheted around the chamber. Fake Republican, bought and paid for by the deep state. His face twisted into a snarl, his voice breaking into something less like defiance and more like desperation. Jasmine didn't flinch. She raised the paper again, reading louder, her tone almost defiant. Congress, not the executive, has the constitutional authority to tax and allocate revenue. The president's proposal raises constitutional concerns. She let the words hang, eyes narrowing. That's your ally calling your deal unconstitutional. Not me. Not the media. Your own house crumbling beneath you. Reporters scribbled frantically. The gallery stirred, whispers turning into sharp conversations. CNN's chyron flared across the screen. Republican op-ed blasts Trump deal, Jasmine strikes live. On Twitter, clips of her reading the op-ed shot across feeds at lightning speed. Hashtags exploding. Hashtag GOP cracks. Hashtag Trump cornered. Trump tried to fire back, voice ragged with rage. He doesn't speak for the party. I am the party. Without me, you're nothing. The words tumbled out too fast, unmeasured, his carefully built image unraveling in front of millions. And Jasmine, calm as a storm might, leaned just close enough for her words to sting. Then perhaps, Mr. President, the only traitor in this room, is the one screaming the loudest. The chamber froze again. Cameras caught every flicker of panic in Trump's eyes. Even his own allies looked away, and as America held its breath, one chilling question rose like smoke through the air. When loyalty fractures, who will be left to defend the king? The chamber trembled under the weight of Jasmine's words, her voice still hanging in the air like the final echo of a gunshot. Cameras swept across the audience, capturing faces no longer uniform in loyalty. Even among Republicans, lips moved in hurried whispers, eyes darted nervously to one another, as if asking silently, did she just say what we all feared to admit? The tension was no longer abstract, it was written on their faces, seared into every twitch of unease. One camera zoomed in on a senator's hand clutching his pen so tightly it snapped. Another caught the image of a young staffer mouthing the words, "She's right." The loyalist gallery, once roaring with applause for Trump's bravado, now fell into an uneasy quiet, their cheers dissolving into hesitant claps and murmurs. It wasn't just opposition anymore, it was doubt seeping into his own ranks. Jasmine leaned forward, her tone low but carrying across the chamber like a verdict. If truth is treason, she said, eyes locked on Trump, then America is guilty. The words struck like thunder. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was deafening, pressing down on every shoulder in the room. For a heartbeat, even the hum of the camera seemed to stop. Trump opened his mouth, but nothing came. His face twitched, his lips curled, but no sound escaped. For a man who had never once yielded the stage, the sudden muteness was more damning than any insult. His silence spread like a virus, infecting the very image of control he had spent years manufacturing. In that fragile pause, the illusion cracked, the press gallery exploded in motion. Pens scratched furiously, cameras clicked like gunfire. News tickers across the network scrambled to update. Trump silenced on live TV. Social media ignited within seconds. Twitter feeds flooded with clips of Jasmine's words, users firing off hashtags, hashtag truth vs Trump, hashtag if truth is treason. Millions at home replayed the moment, some in disbelief, others in exhilaration, all sensing they had just witnessed history twist in real time. On the Republican benches, whispers turned into full conversations. One senator covered his mouth with a hand, eyes wide as he leaned toward a colleague. Another simply shook his head, looking down at the desk as though unwilling to meet the cameras. The divide was no longer hidden, it was exposed, alive, tearing through the party in front of the nation. Trump's fists tightened on the table, knuckles white. His breathing quickened, chest rising and falling as rage built, but the cameras were merciless. Every second of hesitation, every flicker of weakness was captured, broadcast, dissected. He tried to force a laugh, but it caught in his throat, a hollow choke swallowed by the silence of the chamber. Jasmine didn't move, she didn't smile, she didn't need to. Her stillness was the counterpoint to his unraveling, her calm the mirror that magnified his chaos. For the first time, Donald Trump looked less like a president commanding the stage and more like a man cornered by his own shadow. And as the chamber sat on edge, breaths shallow, pulses racing, the world leaned closer to its screens with the same haunting thought. Was this silence the silence of a president, undone the crack that would finally topple his empire. The silence that had stunned the chamber was shattered by the rustle of papers. Jasmine didn't waste the moment she seized it. Her hand slid across the table, pulling out a new document, her eyes never leaving Trump's. "Let's talk about $5.5 billion, she said, her voice deliberate, slicing through the hush like a scalpel. The room stiffened, anticipation curdling into dread. She raised the document high enough for the cameras. "This isn't speculation. This isn't rumor. This is NVIDIA's internal disclosure. $5.5 billion lost when the Commerce Department's restrictions cut off their exports to China." She paused, letting the number hang in the air like a guillotine. Murmurs swept the chamber, senators exchanging uneasy glances. She leaned closer, her words lower, sharper. And then like magic those losses disappeared, like a miracle. The camera cut to Trump, his jaw twitched, eyes darting away, hands tightening on the desk. Jasmine pressed harder. "Do you know why, America?" She tapped a folder. "Because the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, a man the president himself calls my friend, came begging at this administration's door. And instead of standing by the very rules he signed into law, the rules meant to protect national security, the president granted a backroom deal." She unfolded a letter, sliding it across for the record, her voice rising like a prosecutor's final strike. "A France company, a $5.5 billion loss, and then a miracle. NVIDIA gets to ship advanced chips straight to China. In return, a 15% tax funneled into the White House, 15% of every deal with a dictatorship, traded for access to America's most powerful technology." Gasps broke out in the gallery, reporters scribbled madly, phones lit up, tweets firing off in real time. A senator covered his face with his hand, another muttered, "Oh my God," under his breath. On CNN, the chyron updated instantly. Crockett, Trump traded security for cash. Trump slammed his fist on the desk. "Lies," he barked, face turning crimson. "Business is business. We made the best deal for America." But his voice cracked, rage bleeding into desperation. Jasmine struck back without hesitation. "The best deal for America or the best deal for your stock portfolio?" She let the question sting, then threw the final blow. "Because what this country is watching isn't policy, it's payback. Payback to a friend. Payback that sold our security, piece by piece, for profit." The words detonated. The chamber erupted in shouts, the chair's gavel pounding against the chaos. Trump roared, calling her a liar, calling Huang a patriot, but the cameras lingered on his sweat, on the quiver of his lips, on the way his confidence slipped like sand through desperate fingers. Jasmine sat back, unflinching, her silence now more powerful than any accusation. The nation watched, breathless, as the question burned into their minds, heavier than the gavel, louder than the shouting. Was this really policy, or was it nothing more than payback to a friend? The uproar from Jasmine's revelation about NVIDIA's $5.5 billion miracle was still rattling the chamber when she moved again, calm, steady, deliberate. The cameras followed her every motion as she lifted another folder, this one thicker, its cover stamped with the unmistakable masthead of the Washington Post. The hum of voices dimmed as anticipation coiled tighter. She didn't rush. She wanted every second of the silence to weigh on Trump like a stone. "America," she said, voice carrying with the force of a hammer, "if you thought this was about national security, think again. Because this isn't just about policy, it's about profit, personal profit." She opened the folder, sliding the top sheet beneath the chamber's overhead projector. The screen behind her flickered to life, filling the room with a scanned disclosure. Donald J. Trump. Ownership. NVIDIA stock. Value. $500,000. Gasps burst like an explosion. The words blazed across the screen. Undeniable. Immortalized in black and white for the entire nation to see. Phones lit up instantly. Reporters scrambled to push breaking alerts. Washington Post. Trump owns $500,000 in NVIDIA stock. On Twitter. Hashtags detonated. Hashtag wallet first. Hashtag stock president. Hashtag Jasmine strikes again. Jasmine's voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision. "Not America first," she declared, her gaze drilling into Trump's reddening face. "Wallet first." The chamber convulsed. Senators froze, some with jaws slack, others hiding behind their hands. Conservative aides whispered frantically, their eyes wide with panic. Trump surged forward in his chair, face twisted, fists pounding the desk. "Lies," he bellowed, spit catching the light of the cameras. Fake, forge, I don't know Matt, I don't know where you got that. His voice cracked under the weight of desperation, but Jasmine didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. Calm, steady, merciless, she pointed back at the screen. You can scream fake all you want, Mr. President, but America can read, America can see. This isn't my word. This is your disclosure, your signature, your greed. The gavel pounded, calling for order, but the chamber had already dissolved into chaos. Shouts from the gallery, reporters shouting questions, senators arguing in hushed but furious tones. Yet amid the noise, the image on the screen did not move. It stood inescapable, immovable, a mirror Trump could not break. He leaned back, chest heaving, sweat rolling down his temples. For a fleeting second, the cameras caught something no rally, no press conference had ever shown a flash of fear. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. Jasmine sat back slowly, eyes locked on him, her silence more devastating than any words. The nation watched, breathless, as the President of the United States, the self-proclaimed master of truth, tried to wrestle with a reality that refused to bend. And the question pressed into every living room, every feet, every whisper in that chamber. When caught in the light, will denial be enough to erase the truth, or will it finally burn the empire he built on lies? The image of Trump's disclosure still burned on the giant screen when the outside world erupted. Within seconds, Twitter feeds lit up like wildfire, notifications buzzing across millions of phones. Hashtags shot to the top of trending lists. Hashtag Trump sold us out. Hashtag wallet first. Hashtag Jasmine for justice. One clip of Jasmine pointing at the projector with icy precision racked up 500,000 views in under a minute, captions screaming, "She ended him on live TV." Cable networks scrambled to keep pace. CNN screen split in half. On one side, Jasmine's words rolling in crisp subtitles. On the other, analysts calling it the most explosive moment of Trump's presidency. "This isn't just political theater," one anchor declared breathlessly. "This is an implosion happening in real time." Meanwhile, Fox News fumbled with its framing, their anchors visibly shaken as they attempted to pivot. The president's business acumen is unmatched, one stammer, but the camera betrayed him, catching his eyes darting nervously toward the control room. TikTok flooded with edits. Jasmine's line, "Not America first, wallet first," replayed over booming sound effects, spliced with images of burning dollar bills and collapsing towers of poker chips. Instagram Reels turned Trump's furious outburst of lies into a remix, layered with laughter tracks. Memes spread faster than official statements. The man who once commanded headlines was now reduced to punchlines. Inside the chamber, the tension fed directly into the storm outside. Reporters refreshed their feeds under the desk, showing colleagues the viral clips even as the hearing continued. "It's everywhere," one whispered. "She just broke the internet." Lawmakers glanced at their buzzing phones, watching their party fracture not only in the room, but in the court of public opinion. And still the numbers climbed. By the 10-minute mark, Jasmine's exchange with Trump had eclipsed the top ratings of every network combined. Facebook groups exploded with debates. Families at dinner tables turned from casual chatter to stunned silence as they replayed the footage again and again. It wasn't just America anymore. The BBC, Al Jazeera, and Sky News picked up the live feed. President of the United States accused of profiting from China deal. Headlines blared across the globe. Trump's face red, sweating, frozen between rage and panic, was now the world's wallpaper. Every angle of his outburst was clipped, slowed, analyzed. Side-by-side comparisons spread. Jasmine calm, posed, steady, contrasted with Trump unraveling in fury. One commentator put it bluntly, "This is the visual collapse of power. People will remember the look on his face more than anything he says." And Jasmine, she didn't chase the chaos. She let it happen. She sat back, letting her stillness become the image America clung to. The more Trump flailed, the more she looked unshakable. The more he shouted, the more her silence screamed louder than him. By the time the chair's gavel tried to restore order, the hearing had already escaped the room. It belonged to the screens, the memes, the hashtags. Trump was no longer in control of the narrative, he was the narrative. And as the world leaned in, glued to its devices, one haunting thought pulsed across every timeline, every channel, every household. What happens when the most powerful leader on earth becomes a meme before our eyes? The chamber had barely settled from the thunder of gasps and the chaos online when Trump snapped. His chair screeched backward as he leaned over the microphone, his face flushed with rage, veins straining against his temples. The camera zoomed in, catching every bead of sweat, every twitch of fury. He jabbed a finger across the table at Jasmine. "You think you're clever. You think you're strong. You're nothing but a spoiled brat who got lucky on TV." His voice boomed, bouncing off the marble walls, desperate to drown out the silence that had humiliated him minutes before. The crowd erupted. Half the gallery roared in applause, MAGA hats pumping the air, while the other half booed and hissed, their voices clashing like two storms colliding. The gavel hammered, but it was useless. This was no longer order. This was combat. Trump fed on the nose, his fury growing louder. "You're a puppet," he barked, spittle flying. "A puppet for the Democrats, for the radical left, for every corrupt fake news liar who wants to destroy this country. You don't care about America, you care about headlines." Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She sat steady, her hands folded on the table, her expression calm, as the chaos whirled around her. The cameras split-screened the two of them, Trump red-faced, snarling, his fists pounding the desk, while Jasmine sat like stone, unshaken, her stillness magnifying his hysteria. Reporters in the press gallery scribbled furiously. Knowing the contrast would be tomorrow's headline, the crowd fractured in real time. Some Republican lawmakers shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet the camera's gaze, while others forced applause, their claps sounding hollow in the roaring chamber. Democrats muttered among themselves, but even they looked stunned at how low the president had gone. And above it all, Trump shouted louder, his words jagged, aimed not at Jasmine's arguments, but at her very character. "She doesn't belong here. She's not qualified. She's not respected. She's a disgrace to this chamber." His voice cracked, but he kept yelling, as if volume alone could erase the evidence Jasmine had laid bare. For a moment, the chamber looked less like a hearing and more like a gladiator arena. Trump thrashing in fury, his bass screaming in defense, while Jasmine sat in the center of the storm, her composure cutting sharper than any insult. The longer she remained silent, the more his attack seemed small, pitiful, the tantrum of a man cornered by truths he couldn't escape. Finally, Jasmine leaned toward her microphone, her voice quiet but so sharp it sliced through the nose. "When a man has no defense, he attacks the woman who exposed him. But insults don't erase evidence, Mr. President, and tantrums don't absolve betrayal." The room froze again. The words landed heavier than the gavel, sharper than his screams. Trump's mouth opened, but no sound followed. Only the sound of his own supporters struggling to chant louder than the truth now echoing through the chamber. And as millions at home watched the spectacle unfold, one chilling question lingered in their minds. Can character assassination ever destroy a fighter whose weapon is the truth? The chamber still vibrated with the echoes of Trump's tirade, his words, "spoiled brat, dem puppet," clinging to the air like smoke after a fire. Supporters in the gallery had roared in approval, fists pumping, while others had booed, jeered, shouted him down. The sound was chaos, raw and jagged, but Jasmine sat motionless, her eyes fixed on him like a surgeon preparing for the final incision. She waited, letting the nose churn, letting his insults hang in the space where truth should have been. The cameras caught at the President of the United States foaming at the mouth, red-faced, veins bulging, while his opponent, calm and composed, stared him down without a flicker of fear. Then she leaned toward her microphone, her voice steady, measured, every syllable sharpened to pierce. "Dead or a puppet of the people," she said, her words slicing through the uproar, "than a puppet of your stock portfolio." The chamber detonated, gasps, shouts, laughter, it all collided into a storm of sound. Reporters jolted upright in the press gallery, scribbling furiously. Phones lit up instantly as the phrase tore across social media like wildfire. Hashtag puppet of the people trending alongside hashtag stop president. In the split-screen broadcasts, Jasmine's calm delivery replayed in a loop, contrasted against Trump's convulsing rage, the contrast as devastating as any evidence. Trump slammed his palm against the desk, his mouth opening, but Jasmine cut across him before he could form the first syllable. "You can scream all you want, Mr. President. You can call me names, you can smear me, you can try to distract this nation with your tantrums. But every American watching knows one thing: my loyalty is to them. Yours is to your wallet." The room quaked with applause from Democrats and audible murmurs even from the Republican benches. Some of his allies sank back into their chairs, their eyes fixed on the floor. A senator in the second row shook his head slowly, muttering to himself as cameras zoomed in. Even among the gallery of Trump loyalists, doubt began to spread like cracks in glass. Trump's face twitched, his lips curling into an uneven snarl, but the words he hurled back sounded smaller now, hollow. "Lies, radical lies," he shouted, but the chamber wasn't listening. The power in the room had shifted. Jasmine had turned his assault into a boomerang, sending it crashing back into him. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering, her silence now heavy with victory. The contrast was brutal, Trump unraveling in anger, Jasmine sitting posed, unshaken, the embodiment of control. The cameras drank it in, beaming the image into millions of homes, chaos versus composure, ego versus truth. And as the crowd erupted again, some cheering, some booing, all unable to look away, the question rippled across America, sharp as a blade: who truly bleeds more, the one insulted or the one exposed before the eyes of a nation? The chamber had become a pressure cooker. The air was thick with shouting, a collision of cheers, jeers, and nervous murmurs, until it felt like the walls themselves might split under the weight of it. Trump leaned forward, jabbing a finger at Jasmine, his voice breaking with fury. "You're a fraud. You don't belong here." His fist slammed the table so hard the microphone screeched in protest. The sound rattled the room, echoing like a war drum. Jasmine didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on him, calm, unyielding, her stillness like a wall he could not break. The contrast was unbearable. On one side, the President of the United States, sweating, red-faced, spitting venom. On the other, a lone congresswoman, composed as steel, her silence more damning than 100 accusations. The gallery was on edge. A Trump supporter shouted, "Sit down," which, only to be drowned by a chorus of boos from the other side. A staffer rushed forward, trying to quiet the disruption, but the tension had already spilled over. For a moment, it felt as if the chamber wasn't just a hearing, it was about to turn into a fistfight. Senators shifted uneasily in their chairs, glancing at the exits, while reporters gripped their pens like weapons, desperate to capture every flicker of chaos. The chair banged the gavel again and again, the sound sharp and frantic. Order, order in this chamber, but no one listened. The gavel was no match for raw fury. The sound of Trump's ragged breathing carried through the microphones, his chest heaving, his hands slick with sweat. A camera zoomed in on his face, catching the shine of perspiration, the quiver in his jaw, the twitch in his eyes. Then the lens cut to Jasmine. The shot froze the nation, her lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze steady, her posture untouched by the storm. She wasn't gloating, she wasn't even smiling. She was simply there, unshaken, and it made Trump's meltdown look like a child thrashing in a tantrum. The room seemed to teeter on a knife's edge. For a moment, no one knew if Trump would explode further, leap from his chair, or collapse under the pressure. The world was watching, millions glued to their screens, some whispering aloud, others shouting at their televisions. On Twitter, one phrase ricocheted across feeds: "He's cracking." The gavel slammed again, finally cutting through. The chair's voice cracked with desperation. This chamber will come to order, but the damage was already done. The nation had seen it, the mask slipping, the man behind the title exposed under the merciless glare of the lights. Jasmine leaned back, her eyes never leaving him, her silence daring him to break further. And as the camera zoomed close on Trump's trembling face, the question seared itself into every viewer's mind like fire across paper. When the mask cracks, what face lies beneath the leader they were promised, or the weakness he swore he'd never show? The chamber still throbbed with the echo of the gavel, and a new voice rose, steady but trembling at the edges. "Mr. Chairman," it called from the second row. Heads turned, cameras swung sharply. The nation saw him stand. Representative John Moolenaar, Republican of Michigan, his face pale, his hands clutching a sheet of paper that shook almost imperceptibly. The silence that fell was heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. Trump's head jerked around, his eyes narrowing as though he had seen a ghost. "John," he muttered into his mic, the word dripping with disbelief. Sit down, but Moolenaar didn't move. He cleared his throat, his voice rising with conviction that seemed to grow stronger with each word. "Mr. Chairman," Molinar said, his voice now carried by every speaker, "I cannot remain silent. I have served my party faithfully. I have supported this president publicly. But tonight, before this Congress and before the American people, I must speak the truth." The room froze. Even Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked on him, recognizing that history was about to pivot. Molinar lifted his paper, the same op-ed Jasmine had read aloud hours earlier, but this time the words came from his own mouth. "The president's deal with NVIDIA does not just raise questions, it violates the Constitution itself. The power to tax, to raise revenue, belongs solely to Congress. To take a percentage of sales in exchange for a license is not a policy, it is an abuse of power." Gasps broke across the chamber like glass shattering. Republican senators shifted violently in their chairs. One buried his face in his hands, another mouthed no under his breath. The camera caught every twitch of panic, every bead of sweat, every look of betrayal. Trump slammed the desk so hard the microphone shrieked. "Traitor," he roared, his voice cracking into a howl. "Fake Republican, bought by the radical left. You're finished, John. You're finished." His face had gone a dangerous shade of crimson, his fists trembling as if he might leap across the table. But Molinar did not flinch, his voice grew stronger, steadier. "This isn't about party. It isn't about loyalty to one man. It's about loyalty to the Constitution, and tonight, I cannot in good conscience defend what I know to be a betrayal of that oath." The gallery gasped again. Some Republicans shouted back at him, others stared blankly, frozen in disbelief. Democrats sat stunned, unsure if they were witnessing courage or the first crack of a collapse. The press gallery buzzed like hornets, reporters fumbling over one another to get the words out. "GOP congressman testifies, Trump violated Constitution." The cameras cut split screen, Trump sweating, raging, his face contorted, in fury. Molinar steady, almost trembling but unbroken, the picture of conscience over fear. Jasmine watched in silence, the faintest flicker of a smile betraying her recognition that this was more than her victory, it was Trump's own party turning the knife. And as millions of Americans leaned forward in their living rooms, stunned by the sight of a loyal soldier breaking rank, one chilling question spread across the airwaves like smoke in a burning castle. What happens when betrayal doesn't come from enemies outside the walls, but from inside the castle itself? The chamber shook as if an earthquake had struck. Trump's fist slammed down again, the sound reverberating through the microphones like thunder. "Traitor," he screamed, his voice raw, cracking under its own fury. "You're nothing, John, nothing. Bought by Democrats. Bought by China. You're dead in this party." His face blazed crimson, spit flecking the air as he banged the table again and again, each strike louder, more violent, less presidential. The cameras zoomed in mercilessly. America wasn't watching a leader anymore, they were watching a man unravel in real time. Sweat poured down his temples, his tie askew, his hands trembling with rage. His words tumbled too fast, incoherent, desperate. "They lie. They lie about me, about America. This is treason. This is all treason." The more he shouted, the smaller he looked, the less his words carried weight. Jasmine sat still, her eyes fixed on him with a quiet intensity that only magnified his spiral. She didn't need to speak. Every second of her silence allowed the world to witness the transformation, from president to a raging man cornered by truth. The gallery erupted, supporters screamed in blind defense, chanting his name, fists raised high, while others booed and jeered, shouting shame. The two storms collided above the chamber, the sound deafening. But even in the chaos, Trump's voice cut through raw, unhinged, feral. "I am the party. Without me, you are nothing. You are all nothing without me." The gavel pounded furiously, the chair shouting for order, but the noise only seemed to embolden Trump further. He shoved back his chair, half rising, gripping the desk as though ready to lunge forward. Secret Service shifted uneasily at the edges of the room, their eyes sharp, their hands twitching near their jackets. For a split second, it looked as though the hearing might combust into something physical. Reporters captured it, all close-ups of Trump's twisted face, the wild glare in his eyes, the vein pulsing in his neck like it might burst. Side-by-side screens flashed on every news network, Trump screaming, pounding, unraveling. Jasmine, calm as a stone, unmoved. The contrast was searing, the story writing itself. CNN's Chiron blared. President unhinged on Live TV. On Twitter, the clips exploded, his fist slamming, his voice cracking, his roar of "I am the party" looped into memes that spread faster than any campaign had ever could. Molinar, pale but resolute, refused to sit. "This isn't loyalty," he said firmly, his voice cutting through Trump's shouts. "This is tyranny disguised as leadership." The words landed like a spear, drawing another guttural scream from Trump. He slammed the desk once more, but this time the echo felt hollow, the power drained by repetition. And then it happened. A pause, just a second of silence, but it was enough. The fury drained from his face, replaced by something darker, something smaller: fear. The cameras caught it, immortalized it. America saw it. Jasmine leaned back slowly, her gaze steady, her silence the loudest sound in the room. And as millions watched, one chilling question spread across the nation like a drumbeat under the chaos. Can a man keep screaming loud enough to drown out the truth now echoing across the country he once claimed to lead? The chamber still buzzed with the aftershocks of Trump's meltdown, his rage echoing faintly in the rafters like thunder rolling away. But in the eye of that storm sat Jasmine Crockett, still, steady, unshaken. She leaned into her microphone, her voice quiet at first, but carrying with a weight that forced the room to listen. "Mr. Chairman, my colleagues, and every American watching tonight, what we just witnessed is not leadership. It is ego unchecked, it is power without purpose." The chaos that had gripped the chamber began to fade into silence. Senators leaned forward, reporters paused their frantic scribbling, even the gallery seemed to hush as Jasmine's tone shifted from razor-sharp to raw, human. "Leadership," she continued, her voice steady but rich with emotion, "is not measured in how loud you shout, or how much money you hoard, or how many lawsuits you file against newspapers. Leadership is service, it's sacrifice, it's remembering the people who don't have a seat in this chamber, the single mother in Dallas working 2 jobs, the factory worker in Michigan wondering if his pension will be there tomorrow, the student in Detroit who studies by the dim light of a street lamp because his family can't afford power." Her words painted pictures vivid enough to pierce through marble walls and television screens. The camera cut tight on her face, her eyes glistening, her jaw firm as she invoked stories that millions at home recognized as their own. "I did not come to Congress to be popular. I came because entire communities I loved have been ignored, dismissed, written off as expendable. I came to say to them, you are not forgotten. And I will not be silent, no matter how loud the president yells." Trump shifted in his chair, his face still red, his breathing heavy, but the spotlight had left him. The cameras no longer sought his anger, they lingered on Jasmine, her stillness, her sincerity, her words wrapping themselves around the nation like a bomb after fire. She lifted the folder in front of her, then slowly set it aside. "Tonight isn't about a deal with NVIDIA or a lawsuit worth $10 billion. Tonight is about the soul of this country. Do we serve truth or do we serve greed? Do we honor our Constitution or do we sell it piece by piece to the highest bidder?" In homes across America, the words landed like thunder. People leaned forward in their living rooms, some whispering aloud to their children, others fighting back tears, all feeling the weight of something larger than politics. For the first time in the night, the fury of Washington gave way to something different: reflection, reckoning, resolve. Jasmine's voice dropped lower, but sharper, a scalpel against the darkness. "I know corruption has billions behind it, but truth has something stronger. It has people. And as long as people believe in justice, no amount of money can bury it." The chamber went silent, the world watching as her words carved through the nose of history. And as the camera closed on her unflinching gaze, one haunting question spread across the nation: can truth still win when corruption has billions behind it? The moment Jasmine's words faded, the world beyond the chamber detonated. Every television network cut to breaking news, their banners glowing red. "Trump shaken. Crockett defies President Live." CNN replayed her line. "Better a puppet of the people than a puppet of your stock portfolio," over and over, anchors dissecting each syllable as though it were scripture. MSNBC called it the most stunning takedown of a sitting president in modern history. Even Fox, scrambling to shield Trump, faltered. Their split screen showed his crimson face, frozen mid-outburst, next to Jasmine's calm stare, a contrast too brutal to spin. Outside the Capitol, chaos mirrored the chamber. On one side of the barricades, MAGA supporters waved flags, chanting Trump's name with hoarse voices. On the other, crowd surged with chants of "Justice for America." Signs reading "While at First President" rose above the crowd, clashing with banners declaring "In Trump We Trust." Police in riot gear stood between them, sirens echoing as tensions boiled, fists raised, slogans shouted into the freezing night air. Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights cutting through the winter darkness, broadcasting live images of the standoff to millions of viewers. The split-screen effect became a national mirror, Trump's anger, Jasmine's resolve, America's streets convulsing with division. Hashtags roared across social media: hashtag Jasmine for Justice, hashtag Trump sold us out, hashtag Capitol Showdown, each one a digital battleground where families, friends, and strangers collided in comment wars. In living rooms across the nation, televisions flickered as anchors asked the same piercing question in different words. What did we just witness? A president unraveling, or a reckoning decades overdue? Some Americans wept, feeling a flicker of hope they hadn't felt in years. Others shouted at their screens, clinging to anger, fear, denial. And above it all, Jasmine's voice still echoed, like a bell tolling across the republic. Leadership is service, not ego. The line replayed on loops, burned into memory, impossible to mute. The Capitol lights glowed against the night sky as if illuminating a battlefield. Inside, truth had collided with power. Outside, America teetered between conscience and fear. And as the cameras panned across the split crowds, a question heavier than any headline gripped the nation's heart. Will America listen to its conscience or surrender to its fear? Far from the marble pillars of the Capitol, television screens glowed in living rooms, diners, and crowded bars. America was holding its breath, not as voters or partisans, but as families, fractured yet bound by the same broadcast. In a dimly lit apartment in Detroit, a retired veteran sat stiff in his recliner, metals glinting faintly from the mantel behind him. His jaw clenched as Trump's furious face filled the screen. "That's not a commander," he muttered to no one, the weight of combat years pressing heavy on his words. His granddaughter, barely old enough to vote, whispered back, "But maybe she is." She meant Jasmine, her eyes lit not with rebellion but with a desperate hunger for someone who spoke the language of truth. Across the country in Dallas, a single mother balanced bills on her kitchen table, her kids asleep in the next room. She paused, staring at Jasmine's calm defiance replayed on the late-night news cycle. Her heart pounded not because of politics, but because of survival. "If she can stand against him," she murmured, "maybe I can stand against this world." A tear traced her cheek, not of weakness, but of recognition. For the first time, she felt her struggles reflected in the chambers of power. In a college dorm on the West Coast, students huddled shoulder to shoulder around a laptop. Some cheered, some jeered, the room buzzing like an arena. One shouted, "She crushed him." Another spat back, "He's still the president, she's just nose." Yet when Jasmine's words, "Leadership is service, not ego," replayed again, the laughter quieted. Even the loudest skeptics stared at the screen, unable to deny the tremor in the president's voice, the flash of panic in his eyes. For a generation raised on skepticism and memes, this wasn't just politics, it was a shift in what power looked like. In living rooms from Florida to Oregon, couples argued in whispers, neighbors texted frantically, families sat in silence. Some feared instability, others tasted hope, but none could look away. News tickers screamed about the chamber showdown. Analysts filled panels with speculation, but what mattered most was not on camera. It was in the invisible tally of hearts and minds recalibrating. For the first time in years, America felt history folding in real time, not as a headline, but as a question burning across dinner tables and coffee cups. And as the night deepened, the hum of televisions merged with the pulse of the nation. In every corner, from quiet farmhouses to high-rise apartments, the same truth lingered in the air like static before a storm. Choices were no longer abstract. They were personal, because when a president rages and a congresswoman refuses to flinch, it is not just Washington that shifts. It is the country itself. And the question no pollster, no anchor, no strategist could answer, only the people themselves, hung in the silence of 1,000 living rooms. How many families tonight will reshape the future of America with the choice they carry in their hearts? The chamber was still ringing in her ears when Jasmine slipped into the dim backroom, away from the blinding lights and howling pundits. Her hands, steady in public, trembled now as she reached for her phone. For hours she had stood like stone, her voice sharper than Trump's rage, but in this quiet, she was simply a daughter. She pressed the number she knew by heart, the only call that could cut through the storm. "Baby," her mother's voice came soft, cracked with age but still unshakable. Jasmine didn't answer at first. The silence on the line carried every headline, every jeer, every threat whispered against her name. Then it broke, the terrors she had refused to give the cameras. They streamed unchecked, not of defeat, but of exhaustion. "Mama, it feels like the whole country's on my shoulders," she whispered. Her mother didn't flinch. "Then stand tall. Because you're carrying it further than anyone thought you could." Jasmine shut her eyes, the words searing her like scripture. Images flooded her neighbors, Dallas still fighting to keep their homes, the faces of young women who had told her she was their voice, veterans who saluted her not because they had to, but because they believed in her. The tears kept falling, but alongside them came something heavier than grief, resolve. "Mama, he called me a puppet," her voice cracked. Her mother's reply was fire wrapped in tenderness. "Better a puppet of the people than a king who sold them out. Don't you ever forget whose strings you carry." The line went quiet for a beat. Jasmine wiped her face, inhaled, and for the first time since stepping into that chamber, she let the vulnerability sharpen into steel. The world would never see this moment, this fragile daughter holding on to her mother's voice like a lifeline. But it was here, in the quiet after the storm, that the fighter was reborn. Because history doesn't only belong to the loudest voices on the Senate floor. Sometimes, it's carved in the private cries of those who refuse to give up. And as Jasmine slipped the phone back into her pocket, her face still damp, one truth pulse in the silence, undeniable and electric. What drives her forward is not anger or ambition, but the unbreakable love that turns unbearable weight into unstoppable will. The chamber hung in suspended silence, cameras hummed, pens froze above notepads, and even the restless shuffle of aides stilled as Jasmine Crockett rose one last time. Her voice had carried fire all evening, but now it came lower, steadier, sharper than any blade. "Power without morality is corruption," she began, each syllable landing like a strike of iron on stone. Her words cut through the air, not loud but commanding, the kind of tone that makes even those determined to ignore her lean in despite themselves. Senators who had been whispering now turned their heads, and even Trump, red-faced and seething, fell silent. Jasmine's eyes swept across the chamber, Republicans shifting uneasily in their seats, Democrats holding their breath, and the press corps waiting like hunters. She didn't flinch. "We were elected not to serve ourselves, not to pad our pockets, not to trade favors in smoke-filled rooms. We were elected to serve the people who sent us here. And when one man turns his back on that duty, it's not just betrayal, it's treason against the spirit of democracy itself." A murmur rippled through the hall, the kind that signaled a nation on the edge of reckoning. Jasmine pressed forward. Her voice trembled for just a second, not with fear, but with the raw force of conviction. The Constitution was not written to protect kings. It was written to protect the people from kings. She paused, letting the words hang, daring anyone to deny them. Cameras zoomed in, Trump's jaw clenched, sweat glistening under the lights. Jasmine turned deliberately toward him, her gaze unyielding. "No lawsuit, no tantrum, no billion-dollar threat can erase this truth. America will not bow to a man's ego." The silence that followed was almost unbearable, the weight of her words pressing against every wall of the chamber. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the republic itself was holding its breath. Then applause. First a smattering, then a surge, then a roar that rattled the chandeliers above. Senators rose, staffers pounded desks, and in living rooms across the country, millions clapped through their television screens as if history were unfolding not in Washington, but inside their own homes. Jasmine stood motionless, her hands on the lectern, her eyes glistening not with triumph, but with the gravity of what had just been said. She didn't smile, she didn't need to. The applause wasn't for her. It was for the idea she had dared to defend when so many others stayed silent. And as the echoes thundered on, a single question burned itself into the night, lingering in every heart that had heard her words. Will America remember this moment as the fall of a tyrant, or the first step toward the rise of justice? The roar of applause still thundered through the chamber, but all eyes had already shifted to one man. Donald Trump sat rigid in his chair, his body defiant but his face betraying the truth. His jaw locked so tight it trembled, his lips pressed into a thin line, his hands gripping the table as if it were the last thing tethering him to control. Cameras zoomed in, magnifying every twitch, every bead of sweat, every crack in the mask of invincibility he had worn for decades. He opened his mouth once as if a retort might come, but nothing emerged. The man who had dominated headlines with insults and outbursts, who had mocked opponents into silence, now found himself mute before the weight of a single sentence. Power without morality is corruption. For the first time, the silence was his. And in that silence, the nation heard something louder than any rant he had ever screamed. Even his closest allies leaned back uneasily, as though sitting beside him might stain them with the aura of defeat. Phones across the chamber lit up as reporters typed furiously, captions already forming. Trump frozen. No words. The irony was too stark to ignore the king of soundbites, and not by scandal. Not by scandalous no's, but by the absence of his own voice. Jasmine didn't need to gloat. She stood still, watching him, letting the cameras tell the story. In living rooms across America, the image seared itself into memory. A man who built his empire on bluster reduced to silence by truth. And the question that lingered, unspoken yet deafening, was this: what happens when silence becomes more damning than a scream? The moment Trump's silence hit the airwaves, the digital world exploded. Hashtags ignited like wildfire. Hashtag Jasmine for justice. Hashtag truth prevails. Hashtag silence by truth. Clips of her final words ricocheted across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook, each replay capturing the exact second a titan of politics crumbled before millions. Memes sprouted instantly, Trump's frozen face beside captions, like muted by morality and silence of the shameless. What he once used as his weapon, attention, was now turned into his executioner. On cable news, split screens carried dueling narratives. Fox anchors stumbled, searching for words to soften the blow, while CNN and MSNBC called it the most defining collapse of a political strongman in modern history. Independent journalists labeled Jasmine the warrior of justice, her name etched into trending charts alongside civil rights icons and historic truth-tellers. But beyond the nose, the true story unfolded in the homes of ordinary Americans. Families gathered around televisions, strangers debated in diners, veterans sat in silence with tears welling, not because the battle was won, but because, for one night, truth had stood its ground. Jasmine's voice was not just heard. It was felt, cutting through cynicism, rekindling the fragile belief that honesty could still shake the walls of power. The narration closed with gravity, not triumph. The fight is not over, but tonight, truth had its victory. A pause. Then one last message, simple yet piercing, leaving the audience no room to escape its weight. Justice is not a moment, it is a choice, and as dawn rises on America, the question remains: what choice will you make? In the end, Jasmine's battle was never just about politics, it was about the universal fight between truth and deception, courage and fear, service and ego. Her stand reminds us that leadership is not measured by wealth, status, or no's, but by the willingness to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Each of us faces moments, large or small, where silence feels safer than truth. But silence builds walls, while truth breaks chains. So ask yourself tonight, when your moment comes, will you choose comfort or will you choose courage? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss